Page 176, Thursday, September 8th. Kathy woke up with a better outlook. Maybe her husband didn't even realize he'd forgotten to call. He was likely saving any number of new people and animals and homes, and in the midst of it all, he'd gotten overwhelmed. In any case, Kathy was determined to put on a brave face for the kids. She cooked their breakfast and pretended she was sane and content. She played GameCube with Zachary and killed the morning with diversions. Periodically, she pushed the redial button on Yuko's phone. The phone at Claiborne rang in an infinite loop. Noon came and went. Kathy was losing her grip again. I need to go to New Orleans, she told Yuko. No, you don't, Yuko said. She peppered Kathy with logistical questions. How would she get into the city? Did she plan to buy a boat and dodge the authorities and find her husband on her own? Yuko dismissed the notion. We don't want to have to worry about you, too. Ahmad called Kathy. His tone had been neutral the day before, but now he sounded worried. This unnerved Kathy. If Ahmad made of the same stuff her husband was, and both of them made of the stuff of their father, Mahmoud, she could survive 2 days at sea tethered to a barrel, felt this to be a dire situation. Then, if anything, Kathy was underreacting. Ahmad said he would try to contact the TV station that had interviewed Zeitoun. He would contact all the agencies that tracked missing persons in New Orleans. He would contact the Coast Guard. They agreed to call each other as soon as they heard something. Date, Thursday, 8 September 2005. Dear Sires, many thanks for your answering. Kindly please do your best to give us any good news about him. He's my brother. He leave many years ago in New Orleans. (4649) Dart Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. Actually, I'm at Spain, but her wife and children, they left a day before Katrina hit it to Arizona. His wife, Miss Kathy Zeitoun, actual contact number admitted. More information. He remained at home without phone, but heave a small boat, and he went daily to Mr. Todd at 5010 South Claiborne Avenue, New Orleans. Last calling was on September 6th at 4:30 local time. After that, till now, no calls, no news. The phone which he used is ringing, but no answering. Here I included his pictures. Maybe he can help. Many thanks. Sincerely, Ahmad Zeitoun. In the afternoon, Zeitoun's family began calling from Syria. First, it was Fazia, a secondary school teacher in Jabala. She spoke fluent English. Have you heard from Alderon? Kathy told her she had not for 2 days. There was a long silence on the line. You have not heard from Alderon? Kathy explained that the phones were down, that it was likely that her husband was trying to reach a working phone. This did not sit well with Fazia. Again, please, you have not heard from Abdurrahman. Kathy loved Zeitoun's of Syria, but she did not need this extra burden. She excused herself and hung up. Kathy did not attempt to sit at dinner. She paced the rooms, the phone an extension of her arm. She thought through the possibilities, who she knew and what they could do to help. She didn't know a soul still in the city, she realized. It was paralyzing. It seemed impossible that in 2005 in the United States there was an entire city cut off from all communication, all contact. Later, thinking the kids were asleep, she passed one of the bedrooms and heard Ashia talking to one of Yuko's kids. Our house is under 10 feet of water, Ashia said. Kathy held her breath at the door. And we can't find my dad. In the bathroom, Kathy covered her face in a towel and bawled. Her body convulsed, but she tried not to make a sound. Friday, September 9th. Kathy had no choice but to lie. She had never told a bald-faced lie to her children before, but now it seemed necessary. Otherwise, they would all lose their composure. She had planned to enroll them in school on Monday, and have the strength to be thrown into such a situation. They had to believe that their father was healthy and in contact. So, at breakfast, when Aisha asked if she had heard from Dad, Kathy did not hesitate. Yep, heard from last night, she said. Oh, on what phone? I didn't mean to ask. They hadn't heard a ring. Yuko's phone, Kathy said. I got it on the first ring. So he's at the house? Nadima asked. Kathy nodded. And as smart and skeptical as her kids were, they believed her, especially Nadima and Zachary. Whether or not they sensed the lie, they wanted to believe it. Sophia and Aisha were harder to read, but for the time being, her kids' fear had been assuaged, and now Kathy only had to worry about her own. Just after breakfast, the phone did ring. Kathy leapt to it. It was Aisha, another sister of Zeitoun. She was director of an elementary school in Jabla and also spoke English. "Where is Alderman?" she asked. "He is in New Orleans," Kathy answered calmly. Aisha explained that no one had heard from him in days. He had been in touch a few times after the storm, and then nothing. She was calling on behalf of all the siblings, and she was worried. "He's fine," Kathy said. "How do you know?" Aisha asked. Kathy had no answer. Kathy got online immediately. She was swamped with horrific news from the city. Officials were reporting the death toll in around New Orleans at 118, but Mayor Nagin estimated that the final number might climb to as high as 10,000. She checked her email. Her husband had never sent an email in his life, but she couldn't rule it out. She found an email from Zeitoun's brother Ahmad. He had CC'd her on an email to another aid agency. "Looking for my brother Abdulman Zeitoun. Dear Sires, kindly would you please, if it's possible, to know from you about the persons which they forced to leave houses from New Orleans last Tuesday, September 6th, where they are now. I would like to have any news about my brother, which we lost the contact from Tuesday, September 6th from 14:30 hours while he was at 5010 South Claiborne Avenue, New Orleans, using a small boat moving to 4649 Dart Street, where he stayed. My brother's details: name Abdul Zeitoun, age 46, address 4649 Dart Street, New Orleans. From that time till now, we haven't any news about him. Kindly please do your best to help us. Thank you indeed, Ahmad Zeitoun." When it was noon in New Orleans, Kathy called the Claiborne house. She let the phone ring, willing it to stop, to be interrupted by her husband's voice. She called all day, but the ringing had no end. Walt and Rob called Kathy, told them that she had not heard from Zeitoun, and asked if Walt knew anyone who could help. Walt knew everyone, it seemed, and always had a solution. He said he would call a friend, a U.S. Marshal, who he knew was near the city. Maybe he could get inside and get to the house on Claiborne. As Kathy put the kids to bed that night, she forced herself to present a face of confidence. They asked if their house was underwater, and Kathy admitted that yes, there was some damage, but that lucky them their father was a contractor and that any damage would be quickly fixed. "And guess what?" she told them. "Now you'll get a new bedroom sets." Saturday, September 10th, Walt called. He had spoken to his friend, the U.S. Marshal. The Marshal had driven toward the house on Dart, but he couldn't get close. The water was still too high. Walt said he would call a friend he knew who had a helicopter. He hadn't thought it through beyond that, where the helicopter would go or how they would scout for Zeitoun, but he said he would make more calls and call Kathy back soon. Just as she had the day before, when it was noon in New Orleans, she called the Claiborne house. Again, the ringing had no end. Zeitoun's family called. "Kathy, where's Abdulman?" they said. It was Lucy, one of his nieces. All of Zeitoun's nieces and nephews were fluent in English and were translating for the rest of the family. "I don't know," Kathy said. Another cousin got on the phone. "You need to go find him," she insisted. Throughout the morning, Zeitoun's sister and brothers called from Latika from Saudi Arabia. Had Kathy heard from him yet? Why wasn't she in New Orleans looking for him? Hadn't she been watching the TV? She told them she hadn't, that she couldn't bear it. They filled her in. There had been looting, rapes, murders. It was chaos, anarchy. They repeated Mayor Nagin's assertion that the city had devolved into an animalistic state, and in this way she had got the Medea's funhouse picture of the state of the city via her husband's relatives, halfway through the world. God knows, she thought, what kind of spin the media had put on things out there. 25,000 body bags had been brought to the area, they noted. "How can you live in this country?" they asked. "You need to move back here. Syria is so much safer," they said. Kathy couldn't deal with the questions and the pressure. She was overcome, helpless, trembling. She got off the phone and politely as she could. She went to the bathroom and for the first time in days looked at her face. There were blue rings around her eyes. She removed her hijab and took in a quick breath. Her hair. She had had no more than 10 gray hairs before all of this. Now there was a stripe of white rising from her forehead, as wide as her hand. Yuka forbade Kathy to answer the phone when anyone called from Syria. Yuka fielded all the calls, telling them that Kathy was doing everything she could, everything humanly possible. Yuka and her husband, Ahmad, took Kathy and the kids to Veterans Memorial Coliseum, where the Red Cross had set up shelter and triage units for New Orleanians. Various missing persons agencies were collecting information and trying to connect those separated from their families. Kathy brought a photo of Zeitoun and every piece of information she could find. At the gym, it was a grim scene. There were dozens of people from New Orleans there, looking like they had fled that very day. Injuries were being treated, families sleeping on cots, piles of clothing everywhere. Kathy's girls clung to her. The Red Cross took down all of Zeitoun's information and scanned the photo Kathy had brought. They were efficient and kind and told Kathy that thousands of people had been located and they were scattered all over the country, and every story was stranger than the last. They told Kathy not to worry, that each day brought more order to the world. Kathy left with some renewed hope. Perhaps he had been injured. He could be in a hospital somewhere, heavily sedated. He could have been found somewhere, unconscious and without identification. Now it was just a matter of time before the doctors and nurses looked through the missing persons database to find him. But now the kids were confused. Was their father safe or not? The signals were mixed. Kathy had told them he was fine, he was safe, he was in his canoe. But then why report him to the Red Cross? Why the missing persons files? Why the mentions of police and Coast Guards? Kathy tried to shield them from all this, but it was impossible. She wasn't strong enough. She felt weak, porous. When they got back home, again, Kathy called the Coburn house. The phone rang and rang and rang. Until now, she had been telling herself that the phone might have been out of service. But this day, she checked with the phone company. If the phone was not working at all, they told her, she would have gotten something like a busy signal, a particular sound to indicate that the lines were down. But the ringing persisted, and the ringing meant that the phone worked. But no one was there to answer it. Aisha was taking it the hardest. She seemed to swing between worry and fatalistic resignation. She was irritable. She couldn't concentrate. She withdrew and wept. That night, after the kids had fallen asleep, Kathy sat beside Aisha on her bed. She took her daughter's thick black hair in her hands and kneaded it in with one hand, brushing it with the other. It was something that she had done with Nadama to calm her before bed, and Yuko's mom had done the same with Kathy after their baths. It was soothing, meditative for both mother and daughter. In this case, Kathy was humming a tune she couldn't even remember the name of, and Aisha was sitting tense but accepting. Kathy was confident that this would ease her worry, would end with Aisha dropping back into Kathy's lap, contented and sleepy. You hear from him? Aisha asked. No, baby, not yet. Is he dead? No, baby, he's not dead. Did he drown? No. Did they find his body? Honey, stop. But after a half-dozen strokes of her brush, Kathy took in a quick breath. Aisha's hair was coming out in clumps. The brush was full of it. Aisha's eyes welled. Kathy bawled. There's nothing worse than this, Kathy thought. There can be nothing worse than this.